Microplastics, the tiny plastic particles which have inescapably polluted our world, from our streets to our oceans, and even from our agricultural soil to our atmosphere, have now made their way into our drinking water, our food, and thus, our bodies. The scary part isn't even just that they're entering our bodies, it's that they're not leaving. Research has shown alarmingly that these tiny, often microscopic plastic particles are nestling themselves into human tissue, including the most protected and vital organ we possess, the brain. The implications of this silent invasion are only beginning to be understood, but what scientists have discovered so far is nothing short of alarming. Think about every plastic bottle you've ever used, every synthetic fabric you've worn, every plastic bag you've discarded. The plastic humanity has collectively produced over the decades hasn't vanished into thin air or remained tightly sealed in some far and distant landfill. Instead, much of it has broken down over time into increasingly smaller and smaller particles that never truly disappear. Like a fine, toxic powder which is only just beginning to invisibly disperse across our planet. Think about the amount of plastic that surrounds you just in your kitchen. Plastic plates, plastic forks and knives, plastic containers, plastic cups, plastic cutting boards, all of which chip and break and scratch, producing particles which, with each sip and bite, we are unknowingly welcoming into our bodies. Recent research published in the International Journal of Molecular Science has demonstrated just how insidious this problem has become. When researchers exposed mice to microplastics through drinking water, mimicking how humans are commonly exposed, they made a horrifying discovery. The plastic particles didn't just remain in the digestive system as one might expect. Instead, they accumulated in every single tissue examined, including deep within brain tissue. Disturbingly, science had overwhelmingly found that once microplastics enter our bodies, there are few places that they cannot reach. The study's author, Professor Jamie Ross of the University of Rhode Island, expressed surprise at how extensively these particles traveled throughout our body. She noted that, quote, the detection of microplastics in tissues, such as the heart and lungs, suggests that the microplastics are going beyond the digestive system and likely are undergoing systemic circulation. In other words, these plastic particles are hitching a ride in our bloodstream, giving them access to virtually every cell in our bodies. To me, the most disturbing aspect of all of this are the implications of the microplastics which reside inside of the human brain. This same study found that exposure to microplastics in mice led to the same symptoms as dementia in humans. Older mice appear to be more heavily impacted, which raises questions for those of us who have been accumulating these microplastics in our bodies since we were essentially babies, and what might happen when we reach old age and our bodies simply can't fight off or reject these microplastics any longer. In this digital age, beyond the attacks on our bodies, which we're covering in today's video, we also experience constant threats in the online world. When you connect to the internet unprotected on your phone or computer, all of your information that you send, including passwords, bank information, and other private browsing activity, is essentially out in the open for anyone to see. This is especially true if you use public Wi-Fi networks, where all of your unencrypted information can be snatched by hackers, data brokers, and other malicious people. It's for this reason I am happy to announce Private Internet Access as the sponsor of today's video. They offer a virtual private network, or VPN service for short. This is essentially an app which you can run on your phone, computer, or tablet to hide your IP address and safeguard your internet traffic through an encrypted tunnel. A subscription to private internet access will shield your internet traffic and hide your personal information from prying eyes who are looking to exploit it. I personally always have my VPN enabled when I'm out and about working on videos to make sure my data stays private and secure. Private internet access has a policy which states that they do not record or sell any of your information, and this has even been proven in court and through third-party audits several times. Private internet access's VPN also allows you to change your geographic location to different countries, allowing you to view movies and TV shows on streaming services only hosted in certain regions. For example, one of my favorite movies, The Matrix, isn't currently on Netflix in the US, but using private internet access, I can switch my location over to the UK where it is listed, and suddenly it's available to watch. By signing up today with my link at piavpn.com/fortune, you will receive an 83% discount with 4 months included, absolutely for free. That comes out to just $2.03 a month for one of the world's most trusted VPNs. Thank you so much to PIA for sponsoring today's video. Now, let's talk about how, on average, every single week, you are consuming 5 grams of plastic, which is about the same weight as a credit card. I don't just mean through food. We are literally even inhaling microplastics, which are so finely ground and so prominent in our world today that they are seriously floating in the air around us. Unlike larger particles that might be caught by the body's natural defenses, microscopic plastics can penetrate deep into our lungs. Once there, they lodge themselves in place, never breaking down and potentially causing inflammation and tissue damage over time. For those with existing respiratory conditions or those exposed to higher concentrations of airborne microplastics at their jobs, the consequences could be severe, ranging from chronic inflammation to potentially more serious conditions like fibrosis or even cancer. Microplastics have been shown to disrupt hormone function throughout the body, potentially even impacting fertility and reproductive health. Many plastics contain endocrine disruptors, which are chemicals which mimic or interfere with the body's natural hormones. The few microplastics that do break down in our bodies will usually release these compounds. What makes this threat particularly insidious is that, unlike many other environmental contaminants, there is virtually no way to completely avoid microplastic exposure in the modern world. They are in the dust in our homes, the packaging of our food, the synthetic fabrics of our clothing, and even in the very air that we breathe. We can reduce our exposure through certain lifestyle choices, but total avoidance is practically impossible without retreating from modern society altogether. Perhaps most concerning is that we still don't fully understand the long-term implications of this exposure. We are essentially conducting an unintentional experiment on ourselves, with the results only becoming clear over decades, and those monitoring from the outside are raising the alarm bells. Even more horrifyingly, scientists discovered that brain tissue specifically seems to retain higher proportions of plastic, mostly polyethylene, than other organs, meaning our brains, the most vital organ in the human body, the one which largely defines our existence and contains our consciousness, is specifically being targeted, filled to the brim with toxic plastic. Under microscopes, the plastics found in the brain were found to be shaped like tiny shards of glass. In fact, the researchers noted the brain's microplastics were jagged, almost like microscopic razors in neural tissue. Even more alarming, they found microplastic levels were significantly higher in 2024 samples than in those from 2016, meaning the concentration of the particles in brain tissue seems to be rising, and rising fast. Unfortunately, microplastics are just one of many of the modern chemical invaders of the human body. Another threat lurks, perhaps even more persistent than microplastics. They're called PFAS, per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances, more colloquially known as forever chemicals. They simply don't break down. Not in the environment, and not in our bodies. Once they're there, they pretty much stay there, accumulating over time and potentially causing a cascade of health problems that we are only beginning to understand. PFAS are man-made chemicals that have been used since the 1940s in countless consumer products, from nonstick cookware common in pots and pans, to water-repellent clothing, to food packaging. Their remarkable ability to repel water, grease, and stains made them popular in industrial settings, leading to their widespread use before their health impacts were fully understood. Today, these chemicals are so omnipresent in our world that they've been detected in the blood of most Americans and are very likely to be in your kitchen right now. Recent research from New York State examined residents in communities where drinking water had been contaminated with PFOA, a common type of PFAS. The findings were startling. The half-life of these chemicals in the human body, the time it takes for the concentration to reduce just by half, was found to be 3.15 years on average. Some people's bodies took even longer to clear just half of the contaminant. This means that exposure today will leave remnants of these chemicals in your body for very long periods of time, potentially affecting your health decades from now. The health impacts of these persistent chemicals are wide-ranging and severe. A recent review from the CDC outlines a host of health effects associated with PFAS exposure, including cancer, liver damage, decreased fertility, and increased risk of asthma and thyroid disease. The evidence is so compelling that the CDC recommended an exposure limit for one PFAS compound that is 10 times lower than the Environmental Protection Agency's current limit. The federal agency responsible for protecting public health believes safe exposure levels are just 1/10 of what the EPA currently allows. According to the EPA, the chemicals known as PFAS are now so deeply entrenched in our environment, from industrial systems to the very walls of our homes, that the lowest feasible threshold public utilities can realistically enforce is just 4 nanograms per liter. That's 4 parts per trillion, a concentration so minuscule that it's like a few drops of dye in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. Yet even at these near-invisible levels, the risks to human health are still observable and far from negligible. This fact alone just goes to show the horrifyingly potent effects of PFAS. What's particularly troubling about PFAS contamination is that even as evidence mounts about the dangers of known compounds, the chemical industry continues to introduce new similar chemicals as replacements. As described by Elsie Sunderland, an associate professor at Harvard, people call it chemical whack-a-mole. We ban or restrict one harmful PFAS compound, and industry simply replaces it with a slightly modified version that hasn't yet been proven dangerous. Not because it's safe, but because it hasn't been studied. It's a horrifyingly deliberate disregard for the consumer's health, which they are openly throwing out the window in favor of profitability and cheap manufacturing. PFAS can even cross the placental barrier, meaning exposure transfers from the mother into the womb, attacking the child before they have even had enough time to be born into the world. They've even been detected in breast milk, continuing exposure through infancy. Studies have linked early life exposure to reduced birth weight, altered immune function, and developmental delays. What makes the forever chemical problem especially insidious is the length of time these substances have been in wide use before their dangers were recognized. For decades, manufacturers used these chemicals while knowing, and in some cases actively concealing, information about their potential health risks. Internal company documents uncovered through litigation have revealed that some manufacturers were aware of the persistence and toxicity of certain PFAS compounds as early as the 1960s, yet continued to manufacture and sell them without warning the public. Sadly, as we go down the list of these chemicals that we are being exposed to, they become more and more impossible to avoid, with this one being a particularly powerful example of the true helplessness some of us may feel being in our positions. Every time you drink from a plastic bottle or heat up your food in a plastic container, you are likely exposing yourself to a cocktail of chemicals. Chemicals which migrate from these materials directly into what you consume. This process, known as leaching, is yet another way which these toxic chemicals are finding their way into our food and water supplies without us really even knowing. The science of chemical leaching is straightforward but disturbing. Many of the chemicals added to plastics and other food contact materials aren't chemically bonded to the material itself. Instead, they simply sit within the plastic, free to migrate over time to the surface and then into whatever the plastic touches, especially liquids and fatty foods. This process is particularly accelerated when plastic is exposed to heat, acidic conditions, or simply with age and wear. That's why heating food in plastic containers or reusing old plastic bottles can significantly increase your exposure to these chemicals. Have you ever left a plastic water bottle in your car or in the sun for a little too long and then gone to take a sip? You know that kind of nasty taste you get? Yeah. It's for this exact reason that plastic water bottles have expiration dates. The date obviously isn't for the water, it's for the synthetic plastic chemical-filled bottle that is slowly but constantly leaching chemicals into your drink. Perhaps the most infamous leaching chemical is BPA. BPA is an endocrine disruptor, meaning it can mimic or interfere with the body's hormones, with estrogen being one hormone particularly at risk. Manufacturer assurances of safety have overwhelmingly clashed with the hundreds of independent scientific studies linking BPA exposure to a disturbing array of health effects, including reproductive disorders, obesity, cardiovascular problems, and developmental issues in children. After public pressure mounted, many manufacturers removed BPA from their products, proudly labeling them as BPA-free. Yet this marketing-driven change often obscures an uncomfortable truth, harkening back to the forever chemical whack-a-mole we discussed earlier, with many BPA replacements such as bisphenol S, or BPS, and bisphenol F, or BPF, appearing to still have similar hormonal effects. In what scientists call regrettable substitution, one problematic chemical is simply replaced with a chemical cousin that may be equally harmful, but hasn't yet been subjected to the same public scrutiny or regulation. These companies are evil. These billion-dollar corporations are shortchanging us, selling us toxic, noxious chemicals that will leave behind a thin, bitter film of filth on our tongues and down our throats. It makes you wonder if these CEOs would dare to even touch any of their own products with which they so mindlessly pollute the masses.
When I go to Amazon now, it keeps promoting the Kindle to me, and I already own one, and you guys know that.
But you've only bought one.
Another group of leaching chemicals that deserves attention is phthalates. These chemicals are added to plastics to make them flexible and are found in everything from, again, food packaging to perfumes, toys, and medical devices. Like BPA, phthalates are endocrine disruptors that can interfere with hormone function. You may be seeing a pattern here, but studies have linked them to a wide variety of health issues, including changes in hormone levels, reduced sperm count, birth defects in the male reproductive system, obesity, diabetes, and thyroid irregularities. What makes the problem of chemical leaching particularly troubling and, honestly, depressing is that these exposures happen during everyday activities that should be safe. Eating, drinking, and storing food. Unlike some environmental exposures that might be associated with specific locations or activities, the leaching of chemicals affects anyone who uses modern food packaging or storage containers, and honestly, probably anyone who shops at a grocery store in general. The exposure is chronic, continuous, and often invisible, happening right under our noses with each and every meal, snack, and drink we consume. Fast food presents a particularly concentrated source of exposure to leaching chemicals. A 2016 study found that people who consumed more fast food had higher levels of phthalates in their bodies, possibly due to the extensive use of plastics in producing, handling, and serving these foods. From the plastic gloves worn by food handlers to the wrappers, containers, and bags used for serving, fast food represents a perfect storm of chemical exposure through leaching. Even products marketed as green or eco-friendly aren't necessarily free from leaching concerns either. Bamboo-based dishware, for example, often contains melamine resins that can leach carcinogenic formaldehyde when exposed to heat or acidic foods. Even the notorious environmentally friendly paper straw often contains chemicals designed to make them water-resistant. The complexity of modern materials makes it impossible for consumers to fully understand what chemicals might be migrating into their food and drinks, especially for those who are ill-informed and wrongly assume that manufacturers feel an obligation to keep people healthy. Again, I would use the term depressing to describe this dilemma because it is often the most innocent among us who are unable to even comprehend the extent to which corporations act so selfishly. A child, for example, might not think twice about that plastic container of mac and cheese that they heat up in the microwave every single day. Heat dramatically accelerates the leaching process, which is why microwaving foods in plastic containers is particularly problematic. When plastic is heated, the molecular bonds loosen, allowing additives to migrate more readily into food. This applies not just to obvious reheating scenarios, but also to hot foods being served in plastic, leftovers or meal-prepped foods being placed into plastic containers, hot beverages in lined paper cups, or again, even those plastic water bottles left in hot cars. From the moment a seed is planted to the time the food reaches your plate, it may have been exposed to dozens of different synthetic chemicals designed to kill insects, weeds, fungi, and other pests. These pesticides and agrochemicals have been produced to increase yields and prevent crop losses. But this agricultural revolution has come with a hidden cost. Residues of these chemicals remain on, and yes, in our food, creating yet another route for synthetic substances to enter our bodies. A scary realization is that these chemicals are deliberately designed to be toxic. Again, their purpose is to kill any living organisms which might damage their crops or reduce yields. Yet we're asked to believe that these chemicals pose no risk to human health when consumed as residues on our food. Many modern pesticides are fat-soluble meaning they can be stored in fatty tissues in the body rather than being quickly eliminated as water-soluble substances can be. The developing bodies of children are, again, especially vulnerable to pesticide exposure. Their developing organs, particularly the brain and nervous system, can be permanently altered by exposure to certain neurotoxic pesticides. Research has linked prenatal and early childhood exposure to certain pesticides with reduced IQ, attention problems, and other cognitive deficits. I encourage you to really sit down and think about what this means. These effects can persist throughout their lives, potentially limiting a child's future potential and handicapping the full vibrance of life that their conscious mind is capable of providing them. The global nature of our food supply means we are almost certainly being exposed to pesticides that are banned in our own countries. If the implications weren't so serious, it would be hilarious. But the United States continues to export pesticides that have been banned for domestic use and then imports food grown with these same chemicals from other countries. This regulatory double standard means that residues of pesticides deemed too dangerous for American farmers to use can still end up on American dinner plates through imported foods. We are living in an era of unprecedented chemical exposure. Never before in human history have we ever been exposed to such a diverse array of synthetic substances in our air, water, and food. Our bodies are festering with these chemicals, microplastics lodging into our organs and brains, forever chemicals circulating through our blood, noxious substances leaching into our food and water, disrupting our hormones, and pesticide residues accumulating in each of our tissues. Nearly every square inch of our bodies now contains substances that no previous generation has experienced. We have become walking repositories of, I hate to say it, but capitalist industrial chemistry, our bodies reflecting the horrific pollution we have induced upon the earth. It should make you want to stand up and do something. It should make you want to get out there and hold those who are very deliberately poisoning you accountable for their greed. And no, not through anarchy, not through angry protests or destruction, but through utilizing your decision-making and buying power to realize that there is something that can be done, both on an individual level for yourself and family, and on a broad scale by refusing to feed into these systems, instead opting for natural, high-quality alternatives. It's time that we as a whole come together and backtrack the use of these poisonous, toxic substances. Knowledge is power, and by informing yourself of this admittedly scary information that most would choose to look away from in blissful ignorance, you can take action in your own life and prevent some of this damage from affecting you and your family. So, what can you actually do to limit your exposure? Well, as you probably were able to put together, almost all of it starts and ends in your kitchen. Replacing nonstick cookware with cast iron or non-coated stainless steel pans eliminates the risk of chemicals leaching into your food during high-heat cooking. Unlike modern nonstick coatings that degrade over time, releasing PFAS compounds, a well-seasoned cast iron pan develops an oil surface that is naturally nonstick. Plastic cutting boards are also a risk. They develop grooves from knife cuts which shed microplastics directly into your food. If you've got an old plastic cutting board, you might benefit from investing in a wood, stone, glass, or bamboo board. Coffee drinkers are also going to face particular challenges, with pod-based systems like Keurigs presenting ample opportunity for chemical leaching, with hot water passing through plastic pods and internal machine components. If you're just looking for that quick, simple cup of coffee in the morning, consider switching to a ceramic pour-over cone paired with unbleached filters. It's essentially the exact same as drip coffee, but you're just doing it by hand, avoiding any opportunity for chemical interactions. Food storage is one of the simplest moves. Switch to glass containers with silicone lids, which completely eliminates the risk of chemicals leaching into your food. If you get nothing from this video, you probably just want to stop using plastic forks, knives, and break the habit of reusing old takeout containers. They don't tell you that microwave safe just means that the container won't melt, not that it won't leach poisonous chemicals into your food when heated. If you've made it to this point in the video, hopefully your eyes are a little bit more open and you're a little bit more aware of what's going on. Ultimately, dismantling the silent invasion of our bodies demands the realization that individual protection and regulatory and industrial change are just two sides of the same coin. Every glass container purchased in place of plastic, every cast iron pan seasoned, and every conversation about chemical regulation ultimately will chip away at this status quo.